This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. In this episode, I'm joined by returning guest Frank Hyman to talk about the origins of the tomato, why it struggles in our wet climate, and how small shifts in the way we grow can make a huge difference. From myth-busting pruning advice to clever ways of keeping plants dry and productive, Frank brings his good humour and practicality to this deep dive into growing better tomatoes.
Good to be on your podcast again, Sarah. And as I might have said the last time, by way of introduction, I spent my 20s as a very, very successful college dropout. I was on a quest to find my callings in life, and horticulture and design turned out to be two of them. Foraging mushrooms was a third one, and so that's why I ended up doing that book, How to Forage Mushrooms Without Dying, an absolute beginner's guide. And I still forage for mushrooms because who can beat the idea of walking around outdoors and finding gourmet quality food for free to share with people? So I'm still doing that. But my book, my most recent book, Ripe Tomato Revolution, comes out in early March. And I'm very pleased with it. And what people might want to know is that in my 20s, while I was being a very successful college dropout, I managed an organic tomato farm. Me and some friends grew tomatoes to sell through our food co-op and to sell to local restaurants. So this was in the 1980s when finding organic groceries was much more difficult. And so we were kind of on the leading edge of that. And before I ran that farm, I had worked for conventional tomato farmers one summer as an integrated pest management scout. And for people who don't know what that is, the acronym is IPM, Integrated Pest Management. And so as a young man of 24, I would walk up and down the rows of various farmers' tomato fields looking to see if they had diseases or insects. Mostly the answer was no. And so the virtue of that was that the chemical salesman had worked hard to convince the farmers that they should spray for everything every week. Otherwise, they told the farmers, oh, you'll lose your whole crop if you don't spray for everything every week. And so I would walk the fields and say, look, there's nothing bad out here this week. And so they would save a ton of money and time on not spraying. And if there was a disease or insect problem, I could identify which fields those problems were in so they could spray just a limited part of their farm. So they appreciated what I was doing a lot. And I learned a lot about growing tomatoes from, lifelong farmers and put that to use when I was managing the organic tomato farm, using some of the techniques the conventional farmers use that didn't involve chemicals. So I was kind of fortunate in those two events, and then at 27, I went back to school and earned a double major in horticulture and design from one of the top hort schools on the planet, North Carolina State University, very highly ranked. And I studied under a Dr. J.C. Ralston, who at the time, he was just a very nice guy who encouraged me with my writing and kind of helped me see the world from as if I was inside the plant. What does the plant need? And Horticulture Magazine, when they ranked the top 20 horticulturalists of the world of all time, going back to the ancient Greeks and Chinese and everything, he was among the people they profiled in that article. So I was just very lucky, just a string of events, so that I learned a lot about plants, learned a lot about tomatoes. And then I realized, shoot, Frank, you need to sit down and write the tomato book. And one person who reviewed the book said it was the best book on growing tomatoes they'd ever read.
Excellent. I mean, it is excellent. I've read it myself, learned an awful lot from it. So thank you for writing it. You write with great humour, and I love your style of writing, and it's always entertaining.
Thank you.
But one of the things I thought in the opening chapter was actually when we're growing tomatoes, are we on a mission where we're battling the elements and the nature of the plants themselves? I mean, we seem like we're kind of trying to get a square peg into a round hole a lot of the times when we grow tomatoes.
Yes, no, you're exactly right, Sarah. I went to a like tomato class, some free thing somebody was holding at the library about growing tomatoes. I just wanted to see, maybe I'll learn something I hadn't heard before. And the person leading the class, they kind of start off by saying, well, with tomatoes, you just got to accept the fact that it is an ugly plant. It's going to have all these brown leaves all over and bad spots on the tomatoes. And she goes on like that. And I'm like, holy smokes. In a sense, it's accurate because I'm in the eastern US, so a high rainfall area. You're in a high rainfall area. And so they do look rough as hell most of the time. And I wanted to jump on my chair and explain why that is, but I decided not to. I'll wait until I have to do the book. And so, what the book I hope helps people understand is that the original tomato evolved in the Pacific coast of the region of Peru and Chile. So the same region where Chilean wines come from. So if you're drinking Malbec, this is pretty much where it comes from. And the reason, and because tomatoes evolved in that part of the world, they evolved in sort of a Mediterranean climate, meaning they had like 20 inches of rain a year. And in the eastern US, we often have twice that much rain. And in the British Isles and the Pacific Northwest of North America, it can be like 3 times as much rain in the course of a year. And so the original tomato plant and all its descendants that we grow never really evolved the kind of immune system to fend off our fungus and bacteria. You can be growing tomato plant next to, I don't know, sweet potatoes or corn or pepper plants, and they don't have diseases. And your tomato plant is like wilting left and right because it's from a part of the world that expects much drier conditions. So that's, yeah, I'm going to steal that. Yeah, it's growing tomatoes. You're often putting a round peg, square peg in a round hole. So this is a Mediterranean plant, small m Mediterranean plant, that when you try to grow it in high rainfall areas, it doesn't have the stamina, it doesn't have the immune system to survive the way a lot of native plants will survive.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, they can be ugly plants, and I'm sure we'll come on to that a little bit more. But I think that a lot of people in this country are probably sowing their tomato seeds around now. We've sown ours already because we just can't wait when it gets to the deepest depths of winter and we're all miserable. Seed sowing is about the only thing that gives us any hope. So, of course, ours are now sprouting and probably getting a bit leggy. What's your kind of preferred time to sow them?
Yeah, so our last average frost date is around the middle of April. So just say April 15. And it's the average last frost dates, which means you could still have frost for up to 2 weeks after the 15th. So like late April. And so, yeah, we often start seeds in March, late February or March, let them grow for 6 weeks indoors, and then put them out, let them harden off a little bit outside when the weather's pleasant and bring them in at night. And so depending on how, I mean, obviously it's your mileage may vary kind of thing. The people will be putting them out in the middle of April and into June. And one interesting thing that scientists figured out studying tomatoes is that getting your plants out on as early as you think you can doesn't always pay off, because if the ground is still cool, they're kind of sitting there and they're not growing. And ideally, you want like a steady rate of growth. And so a lot of people in my area, instead of putting their tomatoes out in late April, they wait until like early May. So the ground has warmed, they put the plants in the ground, they just keep a steady rate of growth. And even though they might be a couple weeks put in the ground a couple weeks later than other people's tomatoes, they pretty much catch up. By the time fruits are ripe and can be harvested, you can't tell the difference between a mid-April and an early May planted tomato plant.
And is that to do with the amount of sunshine that they need as well?
I'm sure that has some effect, but I think it's mostly just the warmth of the soil. So it's helpful, I think, to look at tomato plants, or all plants actually, as similar to cold-blooded animals, like turtles and frogs. And cold-blooded means that their metabolism, the speed of their metabolism, is going to match the warmth or coolness of the air in the ground. So we're warm-blooded. Mammals are warm-blooded. So even if it's like 0 degrees outside, we're still 98.7 on the inside. That's warm-blooded. And cold-blooded animals and plants, if you put them outdoors when it gets, the evening temperature goes down to 50 degrees, and I apologize, I don't have a translation for metric system. But if it's pretty cool enough to put on a jacket and the soil is cool, then the plant will be cool and their metabolism will be slower. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings me on to another point, which is, I think I'm right in saying that you tend to grow your tomatoes outdoors. I think a lot of people in the UK are still growing theirs under cover. What do you prefer in your experience?
So that's a really good and useful question. So because the tomato plant doesn't have an immune system that's equal to the fungus and diseases in a wet climate, a lot of farmers have taken to growing tomatoes under hoop houses. Are you familiar with that term? Yes. And so, or undercover, as you say. And so the virtue there is that it's not a greenhouse, it's just like a roof to keep the rain off. And by keeping the rain off of the leaves stay dry as they would in a Mediterranean climate. And so the fungus and diseases that we have can't get started. And it also keeps the ground drier. Obviously, there's going to be a drip line or a soaker hose to keep some moisture on the roots, but the roots don't get too much moisture that would cause them to get a root rot where the whole plant up and dies one day. So hoop houses are a great innovation for farmers, but for gardeners, they are just kind of ugly, and the sheets of plastic you put over the top has to be replaced every 2 years. So it's kind of wasteful, kind of, and a burden to rip off the old plastic and put on new plastic. And so I decided, I'm a designer, carpenter, and decided I'm going to come up with something that does the work that a hoop house does, but is not ugly and does not have to be, the plastic doesn't have to be replaced every time you turn around. And so I invented something I call a tomato house. And I have 2 versions in the book, and none of them require carpentry skills, or high order carpentry skills. Like one tomato house is made out of 2x2, so pieces of wood that are a little bigger than your thumb, and screw the bottoms of those to your raised bed, and they go up however high you want them to go, and you can put a little roof over your plants with just some small pieces of wood, handsaw to cut them to length, a drill gun to drive some screws, and you make a little wooden structure, and you put what's called rigid sheets of transparent polycarbonate. So it's polycarbonate, comes in a sheet like the size of a piece of plywood you would buy at a big box store or lumberyard, and can be cut to size easily. And just screw that onto your wooden frame. And so light comes through the polycarbonate, but it acts like a roof and it sheds the rain, so your plants don't get wet. And then at the end of the season, just zoop, 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 you just unscrew everything and you take it out of the garden for the winter and you put it, in the backyard out of sight, so that, and then you can grow your, and so the polycarbonate is not exposed to sunlight year round. When it's exposed to sunlight year round, it'll last 10 years. But if you're only using it if it's only out there for like half the year of your tomato growing season, then it'll last 20 years, right? And so you can make a very simple tomato house out of what we call 2x2s, lumber and polycarbonate sheet. And then I stepped up, for our vegetable garden is in our front yard. So I wanted to make a tomato house that was really pretty. And I have access to timber bamboo. And so I cut pieces of timber bamboo that are about the thickness of your arm, and made a simple structure with that. So, some poles and some cross pieces, and screwed big sheets of polycarbonate to make what's called a gable roof. So it makes a triangle. and it sheds water, so I could grow tomatoes under it. And yeah, so it works really well. It's easy to put up, it's easy to take down, get it out of sight, make the polycarbonate last twice as long. And by keeping the water off of the tomatoes, as you say, growing them under cover, they don't get the diseases and the leaves don't turn brown and fail on you. So it's a good looking structure. It's easy to do. You don't have to be a carpenter. And your tomato plants just can thrive underneath it because they feel like they're in the Mediterranean conditions.
I'm glad you brought up the raised bed issue because you did a bit of myth busting in the book, and I hope you don't mind me mentioning this here.
Oh,
But
please.
I think a lot of people worry about, especially if they're trying to grow organically, they worry about anything leaching out of the treated wood into the
Right.
soil. But I mean, obviously, you don't need to go into too much detail, but I think you busted that myth very nicely in the book, didn't you?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Yes. So in the old days, when we first had pressure treated wood, they would take whatever the cheapest construction lumber was. In our area, it's southern yellow pine. On the West Coast, it's hemlock. I don't know what it would be where you are, but they want to use the least expensive wood because when you treat it, that adds a cost. So anyway, so our pressure treated wood used to be soaked in vats with arsenic, liquid arsenic, and chromium, and which are very toxic materials, obviously. But the toxicity is what kept um, termites and wood rot from destroying the wood. And eventually, after about, depending on rainfall, how much rainfall you had, more rainfall, the shorter its lifespan. Eventually, after 30 or 40 years, the arsenic and the chromium would leach out and the wood would be more exposed to termites and fungus. And so it would start to deteriorate. You'd have to replace it. And then you had some arsenic and chromium in your soil. I mean, nobody would like eat a meal and suddenly die from this, but it would be like a health burden. You know, the way smog and air pollution can be a long-term health burden. You're not going to croak on the first day you step out of the house, but it's going to be a drain on your system. And so how long ago was this? 20, 25 years ago, the EPA, the federal government here, the US government decided, yeah, we don't want that in the wood anymore, and put pressure on the lumber companies. And they found another thing they could soak the wood in that was basically just liquid copper, which in our country, the water pipes are made out of copper. So it's a very safe material. And so liquid copper and a chemical that was a common, like a spray cleaner you'd spray on your countertop. So very non-toxic, low toxicity, whatever the right term would be. And so those two things were put into the lumber and sold as pressure treated wood. And so a huge improvement. So your vegetables, it does break down. The wood only lasts about 20 years instead of 30 or 40 years. But I think that's a reasonable trade-off. And so you can make your raised beds out of modern, let's say 21st century pressure treated wood instead of 20th century pressure treated wood, which had arsenic and chromium. So you can make your raised beds out of a low toxicity lumber that, yeah, it does leach into the ground, but it's just copper, which is not harmful to humans. And this chemical, which I think just kind of breaks down to carbon, hydrogen, oxygen over time. And so it's non-toxic in the soil. And sadly, a lot of garden centers and garden writers are either just not aware of that big change, or are they're aware of it, but they don't talk about it enough. And so I was glad to put that out there that, yes, you can use pressure treated wood now. You're not going to poison yourself. You're not going to poison your crops. The wood won't last as long as the 20th century pressure treated wood, but it'll last longer than any raw wood, and it'll last longer than any rot resistant wood like cedar, which has its own. It's an interesting story how cedar lasts against the elements, but maybe we don't have time for that.
Yeah, yes, I'd love to cover it, but you're probably right. I'm just thinking about, while we're sticking in the same vein in terms of myth busting, what are your thoughts on pinching out side shoots?
Yeah, so I always heard that the suckers, so you have your your main stem going up vertical, and then you have these main branches coming off to the side horizontally, and in that little V space in between the upward growing stalk and the lateral growing branch, you would have a sucker would come out, and people said, "Oh, you'll get more fruit, things will do better if you pinch those off." And I remember doing that a few times at the beginning and realizing, wow, this takes up a lot of time. And if you don't pitch them off when they're small, like you don't get to it, and you go through and, some of these suckers will be as thick as your finger. And so you cut that off and you're removing a sizable part of the plant. And so I just got into the habit of not doing that at all and still had plenty of tomatoes. It was never not a problem. And apparently, some university, I'm forgetting which one, did research on it where they did a comparison, which is science. I love science. So they pinched the suckers on one planting of tomatoes and on another planting of tomatoes. They let the suckers run wild, and the difference in production was not noticeable. And so it's one of those ideas that it sounds like it makes sense. But when you crunch the numbers and when you do a apples to apples comparison, you find that it doesn't make that much. It doesn't make enough difference, certainly, to be worth the effort. So, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if everybody that I work with would agree, but I think that the best tomatoes we had last year were some self-sown ones, and I just let them ramble and nobody did anything to them. Now, in a blight year, I think they would have just been a soggy mess, but we were
Yeah.
lucky last year. We didn't get blight at all. And they were fantastic. And I did absolutely nothing. They just sprawled along the floor and they kept on fruiting and fruiting.
Hooray. Yes, doing less and getting more. One of my main horticultural techniques, Sarah, is neglect. I want to, choose plants that are going to do well in my conditions, and I want to adopt practices that don't make gardening seem like a chore. I mean, we all have chores, but it doesn't want to feel like a chore, is how I look at it. And so figuring things out like the tomato houses to keep the rain off and not worrying about the suckers, and using soaker hoses instead of overhead irrigation. Yeah, things like that just make it so it's not a burden that when you're behind, you feel guilty. Because that takes the fun right out of gardening, I think. So
Absolutely, yeah. And thinking about the watering, another point you made was don't necessarily panic if your tomato plant leaves are wilting.
yeah, because if it's a hot day, the wilting doesn't necessarily mean there's too little moisture in the ground. It can just mean that the temperature has gotten so high that the plant is transpiring or expelling water at a faster rate than the roots can bring it up. And so the wilting might just be a temporary thing. And so in the afternoon, you see some of your leaves wilting, and gardeners in a hot afternoon, we're wilting too, right? So if you see any plant wilting in the afternoon, that doesn't mean stop what you're doing and go water it. What I recommend is let it go through the evening and night and see how it looks in the morning. And if it is just a matter of it was too hot an afternoon, then the plant will have recovered overnight and it'll look good in the morning. If it's wilting in the morning, that's a sign that you need to turn on your timer or turn on your spigot and run the soaker hose or drip line so the roots are getting some more water.
And roughly on average, given that it's not extreme conditions, how often would you be watering your tomato plants?
If it's not been raining, I like to water like twice a week, but sometimes I don't do it but once a week. And so again, your mileage may vary kind of situation. And what is it? The Chinese farmers supposedly say the best fertilizer is the footprints of the gardener, meaning that even if you're not doing anything in the garden, if you're walking through and checking things out. So you see, on your way to work, walk through your garden and you might see, oh, here's some bugs. Oh, here's some actual leaf diseases. I don't have time now, but when I get home, this will be on my to-do list for the garden. And so the footprints of the gardener are the best fertilizer, and just meaning pay attention, check on things. You don't have to stop what you're doing to do work, but if you're watching what happens in the garden, is there wilting? Are there leaves turning brown? Things like that. Then you can hatch your plan for the evening or the weekend and take care of it at your leisure that way.
I mean, people can read the book if they'd like to know how you feed and fertilise your tomatoes, but I did want to just touch on the subject of lime, because I think that might be a bit of a neglected thing sometimes, and why that might be lacking with your plants.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. So going back to the origins of the tomato plant, and that they are from the Mediterranean, the wine growing region of South America. And there's actually 5 Mediterranean, small m Mediterranean regions on the planet. There's like the Mediterranean, meaning Spain, Italy, southern France, Greece, etc. And the part of South America, and then Southern California, where we grow wine grapes, has Mediterranean climate, and a sliver of the South African coast and a sliver of the South Australian coast. All 5 of these are the 5 Mediterranean regions on the planet. They cover only 2% of the land area, but they are the source of 20% of our plant species on the planet. So they're kind of a sweet spot for certain types of plants to develop and multiply. And what they all have in common is they have a low rainfall, so probably a half or 1/3 of the rainfall in the British Isles in the course of a year. And what that means is that their soil pH, the acidity is much higher. It's more alkaline. It can be high as 8 on the pH scale. Where if you're in a high rainfall area, that pushes the pH down. And so where I am in the eastern US, the pH can be like 4 or 5, or at best 6, but usually around 5. And in Mediterranean region, it's around 8, so it's alkaline. And so tomato plants definitely benefit from getting a good dose of lime. And an alternative would be wood ash, and I go into that because I heat with wood part of the winter and apply a lot of wood ash in the vegetable garden and in the herb garden, because most of our culinary herbs are from the Mediterranean, where they expect a pH of 8. And the reason pH is important, I think of it as, adding lime or wood ash to the garden for plants that need it. It's like the lime or wood ash is the key that unlocks a lot of micronutrients that are not available to the plant if the pH is very acidic, if it gets down to 5 or so. And so the adding lime and or wood ash is like unlocks a lot of micronutrients, and the plants need the micronutrients for many reasons, but to a large degree, they need it to create their own immune system to fend off diseases and bugs.
And I could just chat for hours about tomatoes and all other gardening related things, but obviously, we have a finite amount of time. And I just wanted to ask you before I let you go, are you looking forward to any particular varieties this year? Are you trying anything new? Is there anything exciting on the horizon?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and I have to say, to me, tomatoes all taste great. But I am not the person who picks and chooses different varieties. I just grow whatever my wife wants. She's the foodie. She worked in a fine restaurant. I'm 100% positive. She works as a designer, has her own business, and I'm positive that for the entire afternoon, the front of her brain is doing her work, designing things, and the back of her brain is thinking, yum, what would be the most delicious thing for dinner? And she works through her, mental Rolodex of recipes and things to prepare. And then she comes home and she's just a wizard in the kitchen. And she likes, for paste tomatoes, she only wants San Marzano. There's a bunch of different ones. For slicing tomatoes, I mean, she's wide open, but we grow German Johnson a lot. We grow Mortgage Lifter. We grow Gold Medal. My religion, Sarah, is happy wife, happy life.
She sounds like a woman after my own heart, always thinking about food.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. And I want to insert one thing that's not really related, but some of your audience may appreciate this. When I meet young men who are struggling on the romantic front, I tell them, dude, there's 2 kinds of men in this world. There's the ones with religion, happy wife, happy life. And they go, okay. And then I say, the other kind of man dies alone. So I think some of them hear me and some of them don't, but not my problem.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Frank for such a brilliant conversation. If today's episode sparked your curiosity about growing tomatoes, you might also enjoy episode 142, Growing Undercover, and episode 324, Kitchen Garden Living. You'll find links to both in the show notes, and as always, thanks for listening. Next up is Benny with his Insect of the Week. And don't forget, if you'd like to sponsor this segment, drop an email to podcast@rootsandall.co.uk and let's have a conversation.
The hairy-footed flower bee, scientific name, Anthophora plumipes. I'm so happy that this bee is back out. We've had a couple of semi-mild warm days with some sunshine, and I've now seen the hairy-footed flower bee in multiple places. I always try to tell people this is one of the bees to kind of keep an eye out for, to learn, to get your eye in on, and to fall in love with solitary bees. I've been watching this bee every year between kind of the end of February and May for the last 10 years or so. And the joy when you see the first one every year, it doesn't dissipate, it doesn't wane. I really just think this is such an iconic bee that everybody should know it, fall in love with it, understand a little bit more about it, and that'll make the world a better place. It is one of the harbingers of spring. It's kind of wide in terms of its floral preferences, especially in terms of nectar. Lots of spring flowers are suitable for nectar. Muscari, hyacinths, crocus if it comes out early enough. It really is quite an adaptable species. It evolved to nest on soft cliff and upturned sunny root plates, mounds, clay-exposed mounds, sunny. But in the modern day context, it's evolved to be able to nest in imperfect masonry, mortar, chimney stacks, these kinds of habitats. And we can mimic those as well in kind of cob blocks and dry stone walls. They've got a lot of clay in them. And it's a really, really special species in lots of ways, but the male and the female are sexually dimorphic, which means they both look different. And the female's all black with orange hind legs. The male's got the striking hairy feet and the yellow face with the white hair. Once you get your eye in, the movement is quite iconic as well. The way they zip around, they've got such personality. And I do think if you haven't seen them already, please do keep an eye out now for the next few months. Pulmonaria is probably the most desired plant for it. That would be what I would say. Green alkanet is another one I absolutely adore. So ground ivy, comfreys, all the Boraginaceae family really. But they will utilize a wide range of plants. It is one of the more generalist solitary bees. I want to talk probably more about how generalist bees are in other episodes, but bees are iconic. As I keep saying, there are similar bees in the same genus. There's lots of other Anthophora species, but this is the first one to emerge. It's hard to confuse at this time of year, so you must get your eye and you must fall in love with this bee like I did. Got at least one parasite, which is another bee called Melecta albifrons, which parasitizes it. Actually looks a little bit similar in some ways, which often they do with the parasites. And there is a very rare beetle that parasitizes it as well, which I've never seen. And there's another bee that looks almost identical to it, but which is so rare, it's isolated to one pocket of Sussex now. That's Anthophora retusa. So I think we're all very, very unlikely to see that one, but just to be aware of it. I think the habitat requirements of this one's really interesting, as I mentioned. So if you can make cob blocks and put them in the sun, there's a chance that you might get this nesting in your garden, if it doesn't already, nearby in brickwork. So I would love you to get out in the next few weeks. Sunny days, keep an eye out on your Muscari, keep an eye out on your Pulmonaria, all your spring bulbs. There's a possibility you'll see this wonderful bee. Do tag me in. Do record on the apps. As I always say, I record, I naturalist. And I really hope you see this wonderful bee and love it as much as I do.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.